Hello and welcome back to Genesis Designs and Modelcraft, and welcome to part 2 of more modelling for beginners, building the Airfix 48th scale P-51D. So today's all about painting these cockpit parts. Part 1 we covered putting these together, making the necessary modifications for the aftermarket that's going to go in shortly. The paint I am going to use is Tamiya acrylic, and I've mixed my own US interior green from XF4 and XF85, which was detailed in part 1, and XF85 is going to be the black. I've got the parts stuck to various holding tools ready for spraying, and that's what we're going to get on with now. So take some of our interior green colour and a little bit of thinners. Now I always use Mr. Colour Thinner for Tamiya acrylics. Always. It's a little bit in the airbrush. This is my trusty Revolution, and I'm chucking a random amount of paint in on top of it. The mixture for doing things like this really isn't terrifically important, as long as it's not coming out spatterily and all dry and dusty. It doesn't really matter. I'm going to put some tissue on the mat. Okay, these pieces need to be black, so I'll pop them over here. Let's get our green bits there. Okay, don't let me forget these. Right, so that's in there with the thinners, and I'm just going to use my well-worn paintbrush to just mix that up straight in the colour cup. And I know a lot of people tell you not to do this, but I'm yet to damage an airbrush by doing so, after many years. So I will continue. Once that's mixed, I'm going to do the old cover the nozzle and make bubbles. What you're doing here is, by blocking the end of the nozzle with the tissue in your finger, making the air come back out through the colour cup, which has the effect of sort of mixing the bits the paintbrush can't reach, basically, and put the lid on, because I'm fed up of tipping paint on things. Quick blat. Right, flow check. No problem at all with that. So let's get on with it. I've identified the areas of this that need to be green. Now this whole area needs to be black. This is the fuel tank. And in fact, the sort of shelf around the bottom of it is meant to be green. But the thing is, when this is fitted in the model, there's absolutely no way you'll be able to see down here. So I'm not going to worry too much about it. I think this is important in modelling, to spend the effort where you need to and try and minimise the effort where you don't need to spend it. Let's put this pressure down a bit. Right, spray, spray, spray. Because I already added the rudder pedals, I've got to mess around going at different angles to get colour in there. But I think on balance that was easier than trying to spray it separately. Well, I think we've confirmed the urban myth about US interior green being zinc chromate yellow plus black, because that looks pretty darn good to my eyes. And as is usual with Tamiya, it's basically done in one coat. Can't help myself, spray down there and then flip it over, because this area at the other end is actually the inside of the tail wheel bay, and the instructions call for that to be green also. And painting it now saves them a job later. So that's that part covered. Again, just twiddling the stick round at all the angles. Try and make sure I've got colouring absolutely everywhere. And no blank bits. This on the end is just the control column. That's pretty easy. Only worried about the column part. And that's that done. Pop those down. Again, right down the bottom of this part is going to be technically invisible, but if anything's going to make something shine out, it's a big patch of bright pale grey plastic instead of a relatively dark green colour. There you go, that's all the green parts done. Now for changing between colours with something like this, especially with going from this green to black, you don't really need to clean the airbrush per se properly. What I've done is I've emptied the paint out and I've wiped out the colour cup with a bit of tissue. And this black is already thinned and the lid's on real tight. Just going to dump some straight in there. It's ideal, it's already coming through black, it's fine. Now then, I've only got these two little bits here to do. My shot, yes I am. And with pieces like this that have many sides and edges, the key really is just to hit it from every side. And by doing that, you should ensure that you get coverage absolutely everywhere. And from the front. There we go. And finally the instrument panel. There we go. And before we put the black away, I need to do a little bit of masking in order to paint that fuel tank area. Just got a bit of 18mm Tamiya, de-tack it on my hand. And I'm just going to pop that in there at roughly the level where the floor is, like so. And again, because I'm going to spray it from all the angles, at least most of them, I'm going to cover the whole thing in tape. Shouldn't get overspray on it, but you know, I don't want to, so. There we go. It's just as simple and quick as that. And then spray the fuel tank. put this tape aside and sort of stick it to your mat somewhere out of the way, because it can certainly be used again later on, I would imagine. It's expensive stuff. Now with the airbrush clean again, ready to go, I do need to put some clear coat on these parts. So Tamiya acrylic is aggressively matte, and although it will hold up reasonably wellish against enamel washes, it is better all around really if you give it half a chance by protecting it with some clear. And my sort of go-to daily driver clear is X22. This is a super old 23mm jar, and what's in here already, which there isn't a lot left actually, is simply the X22 that has come from a 10mm jar, brand new 10mm jar. Dump that in there, and then I fill the 10mm jar with Mr. Colour thinners, and then I dump that in there as well. Then a little bit more Mr. Colour thinners goes back in the jar, shake it up just to get all of the dregs, and then that goes in there as well. So you end up with about 23mm of X22 in there, which is thinned at just over 50/50. That then, when I use it, generally gets thinned still a little bit more. So this is Mr. Colour thinner, but I put it in this handy dropper bottle so that I can just pop it straight in the airbrush. It's a bit easier, and then a bit of this already thinned X22 goes in on top. So what you're ending up with is X22, and it's thinned way down to sort of 75% thinner probably. And I don't anymore put the extra back in the jar. I did have a jar, this jar, I cleaned it out and it went to Bacco brown. I don't know if it was because I was tipping excess back in or not. It may have been because I hadn't used it in ages, because that was a phase where I wasn't doing a lot of modelling. But it hasn't done it since I stopped tipping the excess back in the jar, so there's a jet going by. Anyway, with all that said, this is really just as simple as spraying over your parts with this gloss. You don't need to spray it super heavy, super wet. We're just looking for a nice even coverage. Just like that. It's not super shiny, and the beauty of it is this system, the way I work this, because the Tamiya acrylic is so flat as it is, this gloss goes on, and it's not super glossy right now, as you can see. It's just nice, but that will dry back and kind of sink into that very, very matte finish, and it will just be a lovely satin finish that you won't need to put any matte coat on afterward. So it's quite it's actually a time saver in the long run, I think. Again, just pay a little bit of attention to make sure you get coverage everywhere, particularly where you think you might put any wash. Got coverage under there, look, there's no black, but that's fine. I'll touch that in with a brush later, because I'm not going to put wash on those parts anyway, because they're black. And I'll put a little bit on the instrument panel just to help our 3D decals to stick. Okay, that's it. Now this needs to be left long enough to fully dry all the way through. By spraying that thin clear coat over the top of these parts, you have in effect slightly reactivated the paint as well. It's all got to soak together, shrink down and dry all the way through before we go on to the next stages, which will be a little bit of detail painting, some wash and fitting these aftermarket bits to the instrument panel and seat. After drying overnight, this is what the parts look like. So just a nice sort of soft sheen. They're not super glossy, but it's a nice hard surface ready to put some wash on. I have fitted this aft bulkhead in position. I've glued that in, and according to the instructions, this sort of framework and boxes arrangement is supposed to go through that square hole in there whilst plugging into position on top of the fuel tank. But in fact, when that is located into the slots provided for it, it doesn't stick through the hole anymore. But that isn't an issue, because when offered into the fuselage halves, there's a wolf child outside, there we go, it's so far back underneath all the structure that you're not going to see the fact that that doesn't go through the hole. So that's nothing to worry about. Then the other parts then. So we needed to do a little bit of detail painting on these parts, and I'll show you what I've used to do that. Obviously some paintbrushes. You can mask and spray tiny things like this. It's not terribly difficult a lot of the time, but then again, it can be time consuming with masking and what have you. So I do tend actually still to brush paint the majority of this sort of thing. I've just got some standard sort of pro art. These are from the big set of brushes that I got from ABC Brushes at the NEC show earlier this year, and they're pretty decent. They don't last ever so long, but they hold a decent point whilst they do last. So colours, right, first thing I painted was the control column. There we go. So the bottom part, the instructions call for 226, the same green, but this is actually a canvas sort of gaiter on the real aircraft. So I looked at a few pictures, and it appears to be that sort of standard US tan brown sort of colour. And I have used for that colour that I like to use for things like that, seatbelt straps and what have you. I often use this colour. It's Guns Aqueous H404 khaki brown, which I think is actually a German armour colour, but it works really, really well for things like harness straps and bits and pieces. I did come to find that the lid was very secure, but when I came to use it, and I had to employ the Guns Mr. Hobby opening device, and the way it's designed to be used, and really if you use these type of paints or any paint in this type of jar, you shouldn't be without this set. The silicone cup, the jar of paint sits into it, and then this spanner has got teeth, different teeth in each end. One end fits Tamiya caps, the other end fits Guns caps, so you just figure out which end fits, and it locks into the serrations on the lid, and then bosh, your jars are open just like that. I do find when they're very, very stuck that sometimes the tool, it does engage, but it will tend to slip if they're very, very tightly, there we go, got it on. If they're very, very, very tightly closed, which is working on this one. And in those cases, what I've actually done is, at some point I went out and bought a second set, so I have two of these silicone cups, and I just put the other one on the top, and there's not been a jar yet that I haven't been able to open with two of these. It's an absolute must-have, to be honest. Anyway, digress. So H404 is there. The little control handle obviously is just black. The seat sort of cushion arrangement, I was struggling to find much in the way of pictures. I didn't find a single picture of a crisscross one like that. The instructions calls for a leather colour, All the pictures I could see that did have a sort of a backing pad like this are a kind of a yellow actually. So I've painted it with Midstone. This is H71, and then I've mixed a touch of XF3 in to brighten the colour up and just sort of highlight it a little bit with a slightly brighter colour. I don't use yellow directly because it would just look ridiculously bright in situ, I think. So I use a sort of a brightened version of Midstone or a toned down yellow, whichever way you want to look at it. And finally, the headrest pad goes on the armour plate thing here, and for that I've used H406, which is chocolate brown, which is another German armour colour from World War II. So now I think it's time to look at doing this instrument panel. Now I did have it in mind to do the instrument panel both ways to help the people that are not going to bother with this Edward space arrangement, but obviously I've had to modify and use the original kit part to put the space decals onto, so I can't now do the standard decal arrangement, which I apologise for. But here are the rules for application of the decal. It says soak the decal in warm water for a couple of seconds, and after its separation from the backing paper, position it on the model. To increase the decal's adherence, use the white glue, Mr. Mark Setter, or applied to the glossy surface. Leaving decal in the water for too long can cause its swelling and distortion. So essentially just treat it like a decal then. And when I used the Quinta decals, they did go on very, very easily actually, but I also did use a little bit of this just to help them stay stuck down. They seem to want it. So first and foremost I'm going to chop this up to get the main instrument panel decal. Okay, let's start with the big one. Keep it simple. Got my tweezers and I'm just going to dip it in my water over here. Hold it in there for a few seconds and then pop it on my non-porous surface there to soak for a minute. Now I'm going to preemptively put a little bit of white glue on the instrument panel itself. And although this glue is quite stodgy, obviously the water in the decal will loosen it up some. And equally the excess will just wash off. Okay, so there we go, a little bit of, this is the ammo of MIG Ultra glue. The super PVAs are available. Now the decal has released, and I do not want this number one, so get rid of that. It's very flexible. Let's position it so I'm in the shot here. Should hopefully be quite easy to line up with that slot. Okay, and I'm going to get a cotton bud, dampen it, and use that as usual with any decal to just roll out, and you can see that PVA, how the whiteness that you can see coming out has been squeezed out from under it, mixed with the water. There we go. And again, just use that. This is the other end of the cotton bud that's clean and it's just moist. And I'm just nipping around the edge to remove any PVA residue because that will just appear really shiny. and that's it done, fitted. Just as easy as that. Now I didn't like the way that number clung onto the decal there, so the next one just fits on this piece here. I'm going to trim all those numbers and what have you out of the way so that that doesn't happen. Quite soft and flexible once it's moistened and off the backing sheet. As you could see when I was handling that whole instrument panel there to get rid of that number 1, it's very happy to bend, and I don't want that. So there, get that one soaking, and again preemptively treat the area where it's going to sit with just a little touch of PVA. Doesn't take many moments for them to come free from the backing at all. Again, it shouldn't be too difficult to position this. And it isn't. I'm just gently pressing it down with the tip of the tweezers. And then do the same cotton bud trick. And there you go. Please focus. Just as quick and easy as that. There are still 2 more small decals to fit, both of which fit on that little compass bezel there. So I'll do that off camera, it's exactly the same process. But that is very, very quick and easy, and to be honest, it's probably faster and easier than fitting the kit decal over all that detail would have been. Now, while the instrument panel decals are drying, and you do want them fully dry before you try and do anything else with that, the next job before tackling the photo etch seatbelts is to do some work with a wash. And of course you can use any colour of wash you like, or indeed no wash if that's your preference. On this occasion I'm going to use this. This is AK again, and it's Wash Aircraft Engine, or AK2033. Doesn't really matter to me what the title on the pot is, it's more about what colour it is, and as you can see it's kind of a dark brown, which is what I'm after, or at least it's the closest to what I think I want that I've got on the shelf right now. So in order to be able to control the properties of that wash completely, I do tend to use a palette to apply it. So I'm going to get a bigger brush off the side here and just get some wash and pop it in one of the receptacles there. Also means you haven't got an open bottle of wash sat on your bench waiting for you to knock it over. And then I've got some enamel thinner just off to one side. We'll see if we need it. So, as you can see, probably, this is quite opaque. It's not thick, it's nice and runny, but it's pretty dense. But let's see what it looks like in situ. And actually, I think that's just fine for what I'm doing here. So I'm just using a relatively small brush. This is, what is this? A 0 actually. And I'm just popping the wash where I want it. Now let's get myself a bit more in the middle there. Load the brush up but not too much, and then put it onto and next to the detail that you want to delineate, and let the capillary action, the natural capillary action of the wash, work its way around the area. It will naturally pick up on all the edges and depressions, and it will sit down there nicely. With anything like this, the sharper the edges and the crisper the sort of edge detail and panel detail that you're working with, the easier it's going to be to apply the wash and then actually to take it off as well. So here I've put it on the rivets or bolts, and I'm also letting it run along the edge. And that's it for that part. This is the seat back. All I'm going to do, there's a raised panel and obviously the headrest detail. I'm just going to let the wash pick all that up. If, like me, you're a bit shaky with your paintbrush detail painting, the edge wash is a really nice way of neatening that stuff up. Right, and then on the back, there we go. Control column, I'm just going to try and get the wash to sit around the join between the gaiter and the stick, and then a little bit at the top. And the seat itself, I want to pick out where the cushion gets to against the seat, but I don't want this colour on the cushion, so I'm going to be a little bit careful about how I put it on. It's already worked its way all the way around that, and it is pulling into the seat cushion a little bit. I won't worry too much. Just to outline these here. And add a little general bit of wash just sat in that seat pan, and I'm going to do the same thing. Just a general bit, random scrub of wash on the floor area, and we'll blend that in such a way so that it makes it look like dirt. For the seat cushion area, the seat cushion itself, I'm going to use this stuff, Tamiya panel line accent colour, and this is brown. As you can see, it's a fairly bright brown. I'm just going to shake that up. And the reason I want to use this quite bright pale brown, if you like, is that it will naturally contrast with this yellow colour without being so dark that it really distracts from it in the way that the darker wash would. Just like that. I'm not worried about the fact that it's also on the top. It's dulling down the colour and adding some sort of hints of dirtiness to the area. So because these are enamel washes, we now need to let that dry before we start trying to blend or pull off any of the excess. Not completely fully dry, cured dry, because if you leave it that long it will be hard actually to remove the excess, but dry enough so that the work of the blending doesn't just pull it all straight back out again. If it's too wet, if you find when you're trying to blend that all the wash is just pulling straight off and not doing what you want, then you haven't left it long enough to dry. Now to start removing the wash, I use two things. I use a cotton bud and I use a paintbrush. Again, a reason that this is rapidly becoming a rubbish paintbrush, but something that will hold a bit of a point. And in my palette I have a little bit of enamel thinners in this recess here. Just a tad, don't need a lot. And again, the advantage of using the palette there is you don't have enamel thinners sitting and waiting to fall over and get all over the place. So dampen the brush in the thinners and dab the excess off on tissue, and then just start picking up excess wash, the little dobs and blobs that were left. We can just tidy them off as easily as that, and every now and again just sort of simultaneously clean the brush and re-moisten it. get it. It's very difficult for me to get at an angle where I can work on it and still have it where the camera can really see what I'm doing. And hopefully it's close in enough. You can see that the dampened brush is happily picking up the excess wash, but it's not just rubbing it straight off. It needs a couple of touches to get it to start moving, and that's what you want. You don't want it so dried on that you're having to scrub at everything to remove the excess. Now I only put wash where I wanted it, as you saw, so this isn't an overly in-depth process. In fact, it doesn't take very long at all. Now this area where I've just placed a bunch of wash, I'm just going to sort of go forwards and backwards and kind of spread it around and make it streak. And it's just there to simulate a little bit of dirt and wear. Not a lot. I've not worn through this particular floor. Okay, so that's all we're doing. If that all looks like far too much bother, then in comes the cotton bud, and again moisten it down a little bit with a touch of thinners. You don't want a lot, doesn't want to be soaking wet, so I'm just going to roll it on the tissue to try and remove the worst of it. I just want this to be lightly damp. I don't want a lot of thinners on it. And then you can just really do the same thing just with the cotton bud. Just dab it, pick up. This works really well around rivets and things. Dab it around, pick up the excess like so. Easy as that. It's a lot quicker, but it isn't quite as controlled. And again, with the area where we're trying to make a mess, we just want some sort of streaking and mess. The cotton bud actually works really well because you can kind of dab it like this, and it makes the area, the dirty area, just look a little bit more random. There we go. Now I've got the dry end, there's no thinners on this, and again I'm just going to tack that where I just want a little bit of soiling, for want of a better word. I can just blend it a tiny bit more with the actual dry end of the cotton bud, so it doesn't look too sudden, and that's it done. My light isn't letting you see it very well, but there you go. Just picked out all that detail, got some smut, and it hasn't taken very long. And again, I've left quite a bit in the rudder pedals to give a good deep shadow and the impression of a bit of dirt. So here I'll use the cotton bud to do this panel. There you go, it's just picked up those dots nicely. And then I'll go back to the paintbrush for the detail. As I say, I'd understand if a person thought that doing wash removal with a paintbrush was faffy. It does take a bit longer than just wholesale wiping it off with a cotton bud or a piece of tissue. But the results justify it. You can get a much more balanced and detailed look, and really customise it to look exactly how you want it to. And hopefully I'm showing here it doesn't have to take hours. It's not intrinsically difficult to do. There we go. A little bit of depth, a little bit of dirt. And finally, here I'm working upwards towards the join between the canvas boot or gaiter and the control column. So I'm taking the wash off the boot but leaving it on the column to sort of highlight that area of detail a little bit more. It's not sharply defined as in the kit, but using the paintbrush allows us actually to create that definition. And then just gently blend where the wash meets the rest of the colour, just like that. Beautiful. Okay. And again with the seat, I'm going to use the brush to work my way around the seat cushion. Backrest cushion, to take that excess wash off the green area, but leave it where it's edging up that cushion. Had a little bit longer to dry, so it's a tiny bit more stubborn. And then use the cotton bud for the seat pan in the same way as I did the area near the rudder pedals, just really just blending it to make it appear dirty. There's no detail here to highlight, it's just a matter of suggesting an appearance of wear and use, really. And the brown on the backrest again, I'm just going to use the side of the cotton bud and just blend up the colour a little bit so there's no sort of big blobs of wash anywhere. And that's it done. Didn't take too long at all, did it? Now I'm going to let all of this dry and I'll come back and I'll finalise the appearance of these cockpit parts with just a tad of dry brushing on the floor, and then we'll put those photo etch belts. Now after some more time, all of this is nice and dry and safe to handle, etc. I think the wash has turned out okay, done exactly what I needed to do, nothing special, but it is just there picking up that detail a bit. It's all dried in and it looks quite good. The instrument panel decal also, this special decal, is all dried down. I have picked at it a bit to see how tightly adhered it is, and it does seem to be, I don't want to pull it all the way off just to see how hard it was stuck, but it appears to be stuck down just fine. I did one minor modification and I could suggest perhaps a second one if people were concerned. Just this edge here, I noticed that the decal was a little bit ragged along the edge, and the edges of the decal have got this kind of white halo around them. So I just very, very carefully trimmed that edge back to be perfectly in line with the plastic part, which removed that very slightly sort of rough, raggedy edge and also the slight white halo. You might be able to pick out around this right hand edge that it is not just a reflection, that has got a sort of a white edge on it there as well. And if you wanted to, you could just run a brush down that to get rid of it, but I don't think it's really going to show when it's fitted. One thing I would have liked to have done with this instrument panel is use a bit of flat coat on it, because the printing it's got a bit of a sheen to it, as you've no doubt noticed, and it's also slightly speckly looking, which is an issue also with coloured photo etch at times. But I can't spray flat coat it, because then I'm going to have to reinstate those gloss dials, and one of the nice things about, there you go, those, and one of the nice things about this is that they're already there, so I don't want to have to then cause myself work, so I'm going to call that done. Again, if you could be bothered, You could use a brush, a small brush, and just pop a bit of flat coat onto it that way. I'm just going to leave it as it is, and I'm going to fit it now to the rest of the interior. I've just popped that in place, and I'm going to let my liquid cement run in from behind just to hold that on, and I give it a little sort of wiggle to sort of encourage the glue to get in behind it, and that is now stuck in place. And the reason I've stuck that in place now is because it's not quite finished. On our instructions here, we still are yet to fit 2 parts, that being this handle, or this lever, and this handle. And these are very, very small parts. If I just show you, if I bring this up tight, parts 23 and 24. You can see just how tiny they are. And if it would, without a doubt, be slightly easier to fit them to the part whilst it's separate, but then you're 98.673% more likely to knock them off whilst you're fitting the panel to the rest of the model. So that's why I fitted the panel first. I find my little piece of hard back for this, my rounded end scalpel. Note that you do have 2 of these. A lot of times, or very regularly I can say, and this is one of those times, Edouard do supply multiples of these very, very small parts, which is quite generous of them, and that's to mitigate the fling factor. With small parts like this, you quite often ping them across the workshop when you take them off here, or you just lose them generally, or you knock them off while you're fitting the part. And rather than having to find this tiny thing, there's a spare one on the fret, which is good. And I'm going to fit them. I'm not going to film it because it's going to take a minute and it's not very exciting to look at, but I'm going to fit them with the Ultra Glue. It's not an instant fix like super glue is, but it is strong, and it gives you that a little bit more working time to get the part in place, then set it aside and leave it alone, and once this has gone off, it will hold the part really, really well. And it has the benefit, like super glue, of drying clear, so you won't necessarily see the excess glue once everything's done. Right then, let's try and demystify seatbelts, shall we? So, Photo H seatbelts, I think modern ones, first and foremost, are a lot better than the older ones. They're very, very, very thin these days, so they're quite easy to shape and form to sit how you want them. But my biggest issue with them actually is that, to my eyes, they just don't necessarily recreate the flow of a fabric webbing part all that well, or certainly can be quite unconvincing, honestly, particularly when they are levitating, you know, just hovering above the seat, or just completely flat and straight and square. It just doesn't look right to me. But that said, through a canopy, they certainly look better than nothing at all, possibly better than a decal. But I think that well done moulded in seat belts look better a lot of the time with convincing paintwork. Anyway, let's forget about all that and let's deal with this, because this is what we're using. So obviously we already removed the kit parts, and here are the instructions detailing the sort of parts that you put together. This is for the lap strap. So you have the lap strap which receives the buckle, which is this one, has the leather pad underneath it, and it has the locking latch, which is this huge part here, and the other one is just a one-piece part. Now the way I approach it, the way I used to do it, was glue one end on and sort of fold and put it into place, and that doesn't really work that well. So what I do now is I pre-form the part, which is what I've already done with this one. It's already bent, so that when I place it in position on the model, on the part, it will just sit in the position I want it to sit in, even without glue. Thus. Now I have also shortened the part, so if I show you the side of the seat there, the original belt came all the way down basically to the stick. Oh god, my filming came all the way down to the stick and just got in the way, and it will not be in any way visible on the final finished piece. So I cut this piece of the belt off completely. It's not necessary, it's been removed, and I cut it with these. These are Xuron with an X photo etch scissors, and they are fantastic if you ever need to trim any thin metal parts. You can use them for cutting photo etch from the fret in certain situations, but if you ever need to cut any photo etch, these are just the way forward. Here's a piece of the edge of a fret that I sometimes use as a scribing guide, and I can just show you. Cuts it perfectly and doesn't really distort the part, because yes, you can use scissors to cut photo etch, of course you can, but it does tend to distort the parts a lot more. So these are worth having if you do use a bit of etch. They're not the cheapest, but it's probable that you're only going to buy them once, honestly. So that's that. Anyway, so that was shortened. So I'll show you how I got to that point. I realised this is all very tiny. I can zoom in a bit, but then I just increase the risk of literally not working on camera, so I'll do my best. Put that out of the way. So let's take this one. In fact, no, I'll leave that there. So this one has the sticking up part of the buckle, which means that when I place the second belt, I need to do it in such a way that it doesn't interfere with said buckle. So what I do is I stick it through the gap and put it where I want it to be, like that. It's just resting in place. Then I'm going to push it down with my tweezers to make it conform to the seat a little bit. Kind of need 3 hands here. I employ a cocktail stick as a second tweezer. So just going to hold that into place roughly with the cocktail stick, and then grab the other end and fold it around the seat pan. So it takes up the bend, and what that's done is it's folded in the wrong place because of the representation of the buckle, so I'll just do it a bit more forcefully now it's off the model. These aren't very large parts, and it can be quite fiddly to get in there, and it's important to get them to sit in a way that you're happy with. That's not too bad, so I'm just going to bend very slightly that buckle back flat again and again. I'm going to trim off this excess belt because there's no need for it. Done. Okay, and then to glue in place again, I will use the Ammo of MIG Ultra Glue. It really is very, very good stuff, and despite being essentially PVA, it does work beautifully on photo etch. Because they're already bent into shape and they already essentially fit, there isn't any need, and I see I'm off camera because I'm zoomed in and it probably won't focus anyway. It doesn't need a lot of adhesive because it's naturally just going to sit in place anyway because it's already been shaped. There we go. That's one on. And there goes the other. Like so. And if you wish, you can fit the little latching locking thing. Canopy's not going to be open on this model, and I've actually blown it away with my heavy breathing there. So I'll just cut the other one out. Canopy is not going to be open on this model, so it's of minimal importance truthfully, but we'll stick it in there because we've got one. There we go. And the way I pick tiny bits like this up is with my finger, like that. They're so small and so light that the stickiness of your own skin is enough. Could be there all day trying to persuade tweezers to pick it up otherwise. A little bit of glue on the edge. And tweezers have decided they don't want to hold it. Just pop it in place down there. On top of that buckle, like so. And the shoulder straps essentially are going to be more of the same. Again, I've got my hardback surface, my curved blade. Work my way around, find the edge, press straight down till I get that nice click. It tells me it's cut. And there's our very rigid looking shoulder harness. So the first thing that needs to be done is these locking parts of the harness have to be bent up 90 degrees. These parts are so fine and so fragile that these very finely pointed tweezers are more than strong enough to bend those parts up. Like so. And this one has to be posted through, so when I cleaned off the plastic moulded in seat belts, I had to carefully clean out the plastic from inside this here, because we do need to put the seat belts through that. Thus. And basically what you need to do is figure out how long you want them to be. These things always seem to be too big. You don't want them to interfere too much with the lap harnesses that are already fitted. So you've just got to play around and find a length that's going to work, which is about there. And then again push them down into shape, and I've just pinged off that catch as I knew I would when I did this. No problem, I'll fit that back on in a minute. So that's set the length, so I'm now going to bend this back down behind the seat like so, so I know how long that's going to be now. Again, this is superfluous, you don't need it. I'm going to cut it off a little bit because it's going to get in the way of the seat mounting itself. Cut it off and glue it down at the back by letting it spring up and putting the glue underneath, and then just popping it down into place. Really just flex and mess around with them a little bit just to impart a little bit of life into them, so they're not quite just flat cardboard cut out looking things. So I'm in shot. Essentially you have to remember that in the end these need to be over bent so that they'll naturally hang down where you want them. Cool, I'm pretty happy with how that is. So again, same deal. Just get a bit of this white glue to sit underneath that belt while it's poking up. And then make its final introduction to the seat cushion there. And again, I'm finally just going to re-stick that little catch back in position on this lower buckle, like so. And that is our photo etched seat belts fitted. Now this can be even further. You could put a little bit of wash or a little bit of pigment dust in there to make them a little dirty, anything like that. You can do all of those things. I'm happy to leave this as it is. Do they look better than moulded in ones? Probably a little bit. It's not a huge difference, but there you go. That's PE seatbelts demystified. Yes, they are fiddly, I won't lie. Even in 48 scale they can be a bit of a pain, but if you persevere, be patient with it, I think the end result can be quite pleasing. Now with the seatbelt sorted and the seat sitting over there out of the way, just drying off, letting that glue set up, I will do just a touch of dry brushing in the floor and the tank areas on this. I prefer to use oils for dry brushing, but you can dry brush with any paint. This is what I'm going to use this time. It's an Abteilung and it's called Cream Brown for German Yellow, and I've found that a sort of light earth sort of colour works really well with the tones in these cockpits. These will effectively last a lifetime, these paints, so the initial outlay is somewhat mitigated by that, but they can become, as you can see from the state of the tube, this has become an absolute bear to get undone. These lids stick like you wouldn't believe. But fear not, because the patented Guns Mr. Hobby bottle opener also works on these. Because you can squash this to any size, you can just grab it with this and bish bash bosh, undone she comes. Okay, so you will also need a brush. You can dry brush with any old brush. There are now on the market actual brushes marketed for dry brushing, but I have yet to find any massive advantage of using this over just any old cheap brush. And we need a little bit of tissue again. Okay, so for dry brushing then you need some paint, you need a brush, and you need the brush to be dry. Self-evident. So I'm just loading the brush up with some paint here, and then I'm going to get rid of it all. So right now I'm just making sure the brush is coated with the paint. That's why I'm doing all this twisting, and just move to different areas and keep on brushing the cloth tissue until there's really not a lot or anything coming off. This brush truly only needs to have a hint of colour remaining in it to be successful. Now, with that done, go to your part, decide where you want to dry brush. I want to pick up these details and the rivets in the floor. So, with the lightest and the most deft of touches, just breathe on the surface of the model with this brush. And go from different angles, and it will pick up those edges. It is a subtle effect. I don't want it to be anything other than that. And this wear area here, I'm just going to poke it with the brush, and it will provide some sort of light marks in that area too, because when you start to wear paint down you always get those light marks. Okay, so that's that area done, and I'm going to just go across the top of this fuel tank area to pick up those corners and that circular detail a little bit. It's not a lot, I don't want it to be. If you feel the brush is too dry, then run it back through this area here where you've cleaned it off. It's rare that you're going to need to actually pick paint up off out of the tube more than once. And this is just providing a counterpoint to that deep shading we added with the wash, basically. And finally, these very sharp edged boxes. You really don't need a lot of paint on the brush to pick things like this up, especially with them being black. And essentially it's just creating a bit of forced perspective on these shapes so that they're easier to pick up on. There we go, that's that. That is dry brushing in a nutshell. If the brush is the paintbrush is a little more wet with paint, you'll obviously deposit more paint on the surface, so it will be more pronounced. You can also regulate the obviousness of the dry brushing by using a more contrasting colour. You know, you could use actual white, or a very light sort of cream sort of shade would show up more, but I'm quite happy with that. That has given the effect that I wanted, which is just a very slight highlighting of the details, which is the most easily seen on this part, I think. It's really not a lot. If you go overboard with dry brushing, it doesn't look great. It's one of those effects that if you can see that it's been done, it's kind of been overdone, basically. And now it's time to actually assemble these pieces together for the last time. Okay, that's that in. I put that there first because that will set the angle for the seat back. Liquid glue isn't really designed to be used this way, which is why I kind of overdo it with the glue when I'm doing it like this, just so it doesn't dry before I get the parts together. Which it did anyway, but I'm going to supplement now from underneath where any damage to the paint will be invisible. We got it now. And with the control column in place as well, there is the completed cockpit section so far. And this, to my eyes at least, looks to be very satisfactory indeed. Well, with our cockpit complete so far, that brings us to the end of the first page of the instruction sheet and the end of episode 2 of More Modelling for Beginners. Thank you very much for watching. Those of you who are following along, please feel free to get in touch, send me pictures, etc., and so on and so forth. So with all of that said, I think it only remains for me to say, until next time, look after yourselves, look after each other. Genesis out.